He fell down somewhere.
Explosions in Krasnodar and Tatarstan, the main intelligence directorate strikes at Russian air defense, Flamingo missiles destroyed FSB facilities in occupied Crimea. Donbas is ablaze, Russia is losing hundreds of soldiers, and in Kherson they caused a friendly fire incident. Putin continues to justify his invasion of Ukraine, while Poland has demanded reparations from Germany on the anniversary of the start of World War II. Hello, my name is Karina Klishun, and right now, here are the main stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you across the expanses of YouTube. The command "Don't Sleep" was given to Krasnodar Krai last night.
He messed something up somewhere.
According to preliminary reports, after a drone attack in Kropotkino, Krasnodar Krai, Russia, an electrical substation located near the railway is on fire. Residents of Yelabuga in Tatarstan also reported explosions. In fact, the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations warned about a drone attack on Yelabuga while local residents reported explosions, and Rosaviatsia announced that the airports in Kazan and Nizhnekamsk are closed. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Plank over? And while so-called good drones are operating in Russia, in Crimea, Flamingo is at work. It is known that Flamingo missiles struck an outpost and FSB patrol boats near Armyansk in temporarily occupied Crimea. And on the night of August 30th, Special Operations Forces fighters in the same occupied Crimea destroyed a radar station and an S-300 system at a military airfield in Saki. Meanwhile, the special unit Gurmo Ukraine Ghosts targeted Russian air defense systems that were on the occupied peninsula.
5 targets were hit. RLK UTOS-T RT-70 radio telescope, GLONASS complex in a dome, BRLS MR-10 M1, MYS M1, 96L6 AP radar from the S-400 air defense system.
As usual, the Russian Ministry of Defense did not respond. Apparently, everything was shot down again and the special military operation is going according to plan. Recently, Russian media, citing Ukrainian sources, started convincing everyone that Russia is preparing for a major offensive. And while Russians were celebrating, those same Russian media began to get discouraged. It turns out they realized that Ukrainians are aware of every move made by Putin's army. After all, Ukrainian sources are spreading both the map and the full list of Russian units redeployed for the offensive on Donbas. From the Kursk region,
Akhmedov has been appointed to command this formation. The very same general whose name is associated with the disaster near Vuhledar and numerous bloody assaults. Essentially, the offensive plan is already known to everyone, and its leader is a man with a highly questionable reputation.
Donbas is currently one of the hottest spots on the front. The Pskov direction is on fire. As Syrskyi reported to Zelensky, it is precisely in the Pskov direction that the Russians have concentrated their forces and are suffering the heaviest losses.
Across the entire front, in just the first 8 months of this year, the Russians have lost more than 290,000 soldiers killed and severely wounded. They suffered their greatest losses precisely in Donbas, without achieving any of their strategic objectives.
Moreover, the Russians are losing their soldiers out of sheer fear of the Ukrainians. For example, in the Kherson region, there was a friendly fire incident among the Russians. According to partisans from the Atesh movement, at first, Russian soldiers from a motorized rifle regiment mistakenly opened fire on the positions of a reconnaissance brigade. There, in turn, their colleagues mistook them for a Ukrainian sabotage assault group and raised the reserve units on alert. A chaotic firefight broke out. This happened back on August 19th. As a result, 21 occupiers were eliminated, 17 were wounded, and the Ukrainian armed forces simply watched. But even with stories like this, they continue to launch assaults. Even with huge losses, they keep fighting because that's what their leader wants. What is happening right now on the front and around it is covered in our report.
The Russian army has been encircled in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to regain control over new settlements while Russian generals have been caught lying. Experts have analyzed the maps that the Russian general staff used to report on the successes of their summer offensive. We've gathered the latest news for you. What's happening on the front today? Dobropilya in the Donetsk region, a location that just a week ago was a cause for concern for our command, is today a section of the front that the Ukrainian armed forces can be proud of. The salient that Russia had created in our defensive line has been cut off, the military reports, and the entire group of occupying forces is now surrounded. The destruction of the enemy is now only a matter of time. Realizing this, Russian soldiers themselves often surrender here.
That's how it is. 1 against 3? A big rule, don't let the 93rd work.
However, the Donetsk region itself remains a section of the front where Russia is making its most determined attempts to break through. 2/3 of all enemy losses are concentrated right here. For many months, the task has remained unchanged, to take Pskovskaya at any cost. The Ukrainian armed forces are holding back the offensive with titanic efforts.
Whether the Russians are able to encircle or capture the Pskovskaya defensive stronghold will determine the course of the offensive. On Konstantinovka, Drushkivka, Kramatorsk and the Kramatorsk defensive district. And the undeniable fact is that the Russian breakthrough from the northeast of Dobropilya, they essentially abandoned those isolated units to their unfortunate fate, leaving them completely vulnerable and without any support whatsoever. Those military units that ended up completely encircled by our defense forces, this clearly shows that they truly do not care about their own people at all.
In addition to the direction toward Dobropilya, the Ukrainian armed forces have also achieved successes near Kupiansk, in Donetsk region. Thus, the spokesperson for the Dnipro military group reported the liberation of the village of Mern, from which the Russians were completely driven out and where a clearing operation was carried out the day before.
There is indeed a lot of work being done in Kupiansk to liberate some of our locations. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but I think that with our counterattacks, we will be able to improve the situation somewhat. At the very least, the enemy has not been able to move heavy equipment across the Oskil River. This is something the enemy has been trying to do for probably a year, more than a year, in order to create the necessary bridgeheads. And of course, operations are ongoing. Work is being done against the reconnaissance group's division.
Recently, the Zaporizhzhia direction has also become more active, according to our military. The Russians no longer have enough forces to launch an assault there without losing effectiveness elsewhere. The solution was to redeploy forces that had been fighting in the Sumy region and in the Kursk region closer to the sea.
This is a Marine infantry strike group, but they are also bringing fresh Marine and airborne forces into the Sumy and Kursk regions. The units that have already been worn down in battles there are being transferred to the Zaporizhzhia direction. Yes, these are some of the most prepared forces for offensive operations, but to a large extent these are depleted formations and units.
The result of such a regrouping did not take long to appear. The defense forces, for several weeks now, they have continued to advance in the Sumy region. This trend continues today.
Sumy region, where they not only managed to prevent the enemy from creating a so-called buffer zone, but also stopped the enemy from approaching Sumy to shell it with various types of tube artillery. Moreover, there are liberated settlements, there are areas where the enemy was successfully, moreover, pushed back onto the territory of the Russian Federation. We have such locations there today.
Meanwhile, Russian generals have been caught in another lie. They've certainly learned how to paint a pretty picture over there, but it doesn't match reality. In particular, the substitution was noticed during a briefing by the chief of the Russian General Staff, Gerasimov. The map indicated that Russia controls the entire gray zone where their soldiers have ever appeared. However, analysts compared it with the deep state map and confirmed the forgery. Moreover, it seems the map hasn't been updated for a long time, because not only gray zones are marked as Russian, but even territories that have been returned to Ukrainian control. However, the shame did not end there.
In the daytime selection of troops, the non-stop offensive continues along almost the entire front line. And since March, they have collected more than 3,500 square kilometers of territory and 149 settlements.
It would seem that there is nothing wrong with these bravura speeches. Gerasimova. Clarity was brought by journalists who calculated how many populated areas there are in the regions that the Russian Federation is laying claim to.
Now just compare 149 and 8640. Okay, let's even carefully subtract from this total those settlements that are already firmly under the control of the Russian Federation army. Still, we are talking not about just 1, 2, 3 or even 4,000 settlements, but a significantly larger number. In half a year, 149 settlements have come under the control of the Russian Federation army.
As a result, all Western and Ukrainian analysts agree on one thing. The Russian summer offensive not only failed, but considering the ratio of losses to results for the Russian Federation, it became the most disastrous military operation for Putin's army in its entire history.
Putin continues this war even knowing about the massive losses, and he also keeps making excuses. Now he is feeding society new propaganda. Now, according to him, the war in Ukraine, which he called a crisis, supposedly happened not because of Russia's invasion, but because of a coup d'etat.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And regarding the crisis around Ukraine, let me remind you in this context that this crisis did not arise as a result of Russia's unprovoked and aggressive attack on Ukraine, but as a direct and significant result of a politically motivated coup d'etat that occurred within Ukraine, which was widely supported and actively provoked by the Western powers and their allies, and then by attempts to use the armed forces to suppress the resistance of those regions of Ukraine and those people in Ukraine who did not accept or support this coup.
He even scratched his nose. He clearly can barely believe what he just said himself. But in front of the Chinese, he has to justify himself somehow. The second reason, of course, is NATO.
And the second reason for the crisis lies in the West's constant, persistent attempts to draw Ukraine into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which, as we have repeatedly emphasized and clearly stated over many, many years, poses a direct and undeniable threat to Russia's national security and stability. By the way, as a result of the coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014, the country's political leadership that did not support Ukraine's accession to the Euro-Atlantic bloc, to NATO, was removed.
At that time, politicians from the pro-Putin Yanukovych team supported handing Ukraine over to the Russian Federation, adopting Russian laws and pursuing isolation. But the Ukrainian people did not allow this to happen because they know what freedom is and hate dictatorship and regimes. Putin will never understand this. And as for Russians, even less so. They are slaves forever. At the same time, Putin emphasized that the understanding and discussions during the meeting in Alaska are paving the way to peace in Ukraine.
The top officials in Alaska, I hope, are also moving in this direction, opening the road to peace in Ukraine. During the bilateral meetings scheduled for today and tomorrow, I will, of course, inform my colleagues in more detail and at greater length about the results of the negotiations in Alaska.
What exactly Putin discussed with Trump in Alaska and how the path to peace is visible under the conditions set by the Kremlin dictator is unclear. Well, I suppose we'll find out later. Putin can lie as much as he wants, promise prosperity, but in reality, he brings only destruction. In the occupied territories of the Donetsk region, people continue to literally survive without running water. There are no plans to repair the water supply systems there, but the head of the occupation authorities, Putin, has already become the owner of several drinking water production plants and is selling water at exorbitant prices. And if people don't have money, they end up buying swamp water. But the deputies of the Pskov region decided to help. They donated as many as 2,000 bottles of water for the local residents.
Today, the Volunteer Resource Center of the Pskov region, with the support of Vodacom LLC, as part of the regional headquarters We Are Together, is shipping more than 2,000 bottles of drinking water. And this is an important step towards supporting people in need. The main mission of volunteering is to be there for those who need our help.
It's just a circus because in the so-called DNR there are about 1 million residents and these bottles are only enough for a few apartment entrances. And the same problem exists in Enerhodar. Before the occupiers arrived, it was a prosperous and well-off city of nuclear power plant workers. Now Enerhodar has turned into a ghost town where people live in fear and poverty. We will show you what life looks like in a city forced to find itself under the Russian world.
3 stripes of the flag. That's not by accident. The white stripe stands for peace and purity. The blue stripe is the color of the sky, of ornate domes, joy and wonders. The red stripe stands for the heroism of soldiers.
The Russian world and its consequences. Here, Ukrainians live as if behind an iron curtain. Russian media have created an atmosphere of fear in the city. Enerhodar has been turned into a ghost town, with searches, detentions, and the seizure of empty apartments.
What changes do you consider to be the most significant? Maybe for the better, or at least not entirely for the better, but in a constructive direction. What is there that you can really hold on to?
What has significantly changed is, first and foremost, I clearly see that people have truly started to believe. They have genuinely come to believe that, a huge amount is being done. A lot of effort is being made to keep the city alive. A great deal has changed in 2 years.
What is really happening in the Ukrainian city? Reuters conducted an investigation and interviewed more than 50 current and former residents. Documents from the occupation authorities were analyzed, and here is what was discovered. The city near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has turned into a hotbed of lawlessness. If 53,000 people lived there before the invasion, only about 10,000 remained after the occupation of the local population. The city with the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, Enerhodar, has been under Russian occupation for 3 years. During this time, about 80% of the indigenous population has left.
And we took his words as a call to action. A contest was announced in the city for the image that would appear on these walls.
Rosatom and the Russian authorities are brainwashing children and intimidating adults.
I have carefully stuck a detailed note with a phone number that you absolutely need to call before you even consider opening the door. Look, here is another apartment sealed off.
Children are being actively indoctrinated, told about the greatness of Russia and its president, Putin.
Gusti want to give you books. The books are very beautiful, wonderful, and educational, as if they will well together. But will there be any sound from the Zaporozhets? I think that with your teacher you will definitely study these textbooks.
The youth must have their brains washed.
So to speak, brainwashing. Rosatom, accordingly, is doing everything necessary.
Rosatom, together with the Kremlin, actively sponsors cultural events with a focus on Russian patriotism and pays for children's trips to the Russian Federation. Schools and kindergartens celebrate Russian state holidays as well as the day of the annexation of Crimea.
Our team weaves camouflage nets, makes trench candles, and collects humanitarian aid. We are always happy to welcome new members to our team. And of course, we would be glad to see you among us. Young people from the Kamensko-Dniprovsky district and Enerhodar. After all, only together can we achieve more.
Students are being recruited into Russian youth organizations, the Yunarmia, the Youth Movement, and the Young Guard. They organize military competitions. Enerhodar has always been a surplus city and was among the top 10 cities in Ukraine, in terms of tax payments, salaries, and budget fulfillment.
Another city, Enerhodar, has joined the country's nuclear family.
Thank you, Russia. Today, Enerhodar can barely make ends meet.
She transferred money to the USM. There were transfers of 100, 200. I transferred money specifically to that site. Don't even think about transferring, no one will appreciate it.
In addition to the very fact of the occupiers' presence and their ongoing physical and psychological pressure, which is made worse by constant propaganda that people find extremely hard to endure, there are also everyday problems. In Enerhodar, ever since the arrival of the Russian world, electricity has been a constant problem.
There is water, but no hot water. Sometimes there are power outages. Because here, of course, there is a nuclear power plant, which we also visited today. I'll talk about that a bit later. But even though it's operating, it doesn't provide energy.
The plant always provided heat to the city and jobs. The occupiers put the operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant at risk every day. Before the invasion, about 11,000 people worked at the plant. After the occupation, the Russians fired the staff who refused to sign contracts with them. Now, those who were forced to work, or those who chose to work of their own free will, more than 2,000. All of them are either influenced by propaganda or are doing it out of desperation. Medical care, as in many cities under Russian occupation, is primarily reserved for the occupiers themselves. Russian military personnel are given priority. Utility workers are fighting for their salaries. The occupiers have not paid salaries in the public sector for more than 6 months.
There are certain very specific and important criteria that must be met for cities that host nuclear power plants. And one of the most crucial criteria is the successful combination of excellent and appealing living conditions within the city itself, ensuring that residents do not wish to leave, but rather, on the contrary, are encouraged to come, return, and remain here for the long term. And of course, work at the nuclear power plant.
Locals say that families from different regions of Russia are moving to the city. Among them are residents of Yaroslavl, Volgodonsk, Krasnodar, and Irkutsk. There, just like in Mariupol, the occupation authorities deny any population replacement. The city has become a symbol of Russification and forced control over Ukraine's nuclear energy.
Friends, I see your comments. We have a lot of viewers in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, the USA, and Europe. We are very grateful to you for your support. Let us know which country you're watching this episode from and whether you believe that good will triumph over evil in this war. I'll be happy to read and like your comments this evening. Meanwhile, let's continue. The most interesting part is coming up. Meanwhile, in Belarus, the military exercises Zapad 2025 have begun. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. It is known that 450 units of weaponry and equipment will be involved. Specifically, 9 airplanes and helicopters, as well as 70 drones of various types. Moreover, in the coming weeks, the use of nuclear weapons will be practiced. And all of this is happening near the border with Ukraine. According to the General Staff of the Belarusian Armed Forces, the Russians will be sharing. But in my opinion, 2,000 soldiers are not enough for the standard execution of Russian meat assaults. It's a pity that Lukashenko still doesn't understand that this isn't a defensive exercise. It's a rehearsal for fully dragging Belarus into the war. And these are consequences of an entirely different scale. Meanwhile, Polish President Nawrocki stated that he is demanding reparations from Germany. Yesterday was the anniversary of the start of World War II. It was on this day in 1939 that Germany attacked Poland. Nawrocki, together with other officials, laid flowers at the grave of Polish soldiers in Gdansk, which is where the German invasion began. After that, he made his statement about reparations. According to the Polish president, in order to build a partnership based on truth and good relations. In his opinion, this is fair. He did not specify why now and not earlier. Now, from historical disputes in Europe to a sensation across the ocean. Donald Trump is dead. This headline literally blew up the world's media. Among the evidence are J.D. Vance's words about being ready to take the helm in the event of funny and proper situations if the worst-case scenario. There was also a stir at the pizzerias near the White House. So what really happened and what is Donald Trump's condition? We looked into the details in our report.
Trump has died. Rumors began to spread on Twitter, Telegram, and other online platforms about the possible death of Donald Trump, who has not appeared in front of cameras or on live TV broadcasts for several days in a row.
Let's try to put an end to all this.
Recently, the American press has been talking a lot about the fact that things are not going well for Trump. The reason for all this is the observations made by the press, swelling in the president's legs and ankles, as well as large bruises on his arms. Trump has even started wearing compression stockings and applying foundation to his hands to hide his condition.
I noticed that he forgets what he's talking about, and it's starting to resemble Joe Biden's manner in recent years.
It is precisely poor physical and mental health. The poor health of the 46th President Joe Biden has been Trump's main criticism of the Democrats. And now Donald himself doesn't look any better.
Donald Trump has problems with concentration. In addition, we are observing a number of cognitive impairments in the American president.
No matter how much the White House administration tries to convince journalists that the bruises on the president's hands are the result of constant and lengthy handshakes at meetings, the American press has already dubbed them Trump's black marks. On overseas television, on the radio, and in podcasts, medical experts of all kinds, based on visible symptoms, are trying to analyze what is happening with Trump and are counting the days until his demise.
Even members of his close inner circle don't know how he actually feels. But the real problem here is that it's not just them who don't know. The American public doesn't know. The world as a whole doesn't know.
However, Trump's opponents shouldn't count on the American president's imminent demise. Despite the swelling and bruises, Donald's health is actually fine. Let's not forget, next year he will already be 80 years old. That's a very respectable age. An old age combined with a stressful, demanding job always makes itself felt.
As with any illness, there are episodes when the president's condition improves and episodes when it worsens, especially when the patient is under such close observation.
In addition, Donald Trump shows signs of heart failure. This is a typical illness for people his age. That's why presidential doctors assure there is also excessive swelling of the head of state.
We carefully examine all the test results, we compare them with scientific literature, and in addition, we weigh every decision we make.
However, aside from the president's physical condition, many in the US have recently been complaining about the mental clarity of their leader. Over the past 6 months since the inauguration, the 47th president has increasingly begun to resemble the predecessor he once criticized. Trump increasingly gets confused in his statements, forgets what he just said, and at times can't tell Albania from Armenia or a sea from an ocean.
I believe that the question of Donald Trump's mental health is, at the very least, questionable. Nevertheless, Trump remains the most influential person in the world, and people have to take him into account.
If, however, Trump's sudden disappearance from television was caused by his mental health issues, everything becomes much clearer, conspiracy theorists explain. In that case, the recent statement by US Vice President J.D. Vance also seems logical. He, let me remind you, unexpectedly expressed his willingness to become head of state, but only on the condition that something happens to the American leader, Donald Trump. That something happens. And whether it has happened or not, we will find out in the coming days. After all, the American president won't be able to stay out of the spotlight for long.
And while Putin applauds Trump and rolls out the red carpet for him in Alaska, Russians continue to hate the United States. With minds brainwashed by Kremlin propaganda, they dream of launching a missile at Washington and the Pentagon.
Flight orders, intercontinental flight orders, intercontinental march on Washington. March on the Pentagon. March on Washington. March on the Pentagon.
Well, what can you say? The madness is getting stronger. You can't understand Russia with reason. How do you like our news? Do you like it or not so much? Write to us about what we should change to get better. We will definitely take it into account. And in the meantime, give this video a like to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss the next episodes. See you!